guys today. Caitlin Clark gets kneed in the groin, punched in the throat. Alyssa Thomas puts all of her body weight on her to stand up after falling to the ground, punching her and kneeing her in the groin. No foul gets called, they play on.
It happened in the second quarter at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, in a game that should have just been another entry in the Fever-Mercury rivalry. Caitlin Clark drove into the lane, slipped, and went down hard onto the hardwood. As she pushed herself back up off the floor, Alyssa Thomas drove a closed fist directly into her throat and then stepped over her like she wasn't even there. There was no whistle. There was no foul call. There was no flagrant review, even though the contact was clear enough to freeze an entire arena into stunned silence. The Fever ended up losing that game 111-109, but almost nobody is talking about the final score right now. They're talking about the hand that landed on Clark's neck. The clip that's been replayed thousands of times across every social platform, and the officiating crew that somehow missed it entirely. Fever head coach Stephanie White refused to stay quiet after the buzzer, calling the non-call egregious and utterly disrespectful in front of reporters. But here's the part that's really setting fans off. This is not an isolated incident, and once you start digging into the history between these two teams, this play stops looking like a simple basketball accident. Right now, your brain is probably running through a dozen different angles at once, trying to make sense of what you just watched. Was that punch actually intentional? Or was it just a chaotic scramble for a loose ball that looked far worse once it got slowed down on camera? Why didn't the officials call anything at all, when even a routine foul would have been the bare minimum response to that kind of contact? Is Alyssa Thomas genuinely as dirty a player as fans online are claiming, or is her reputation doing more of the talking than the actual replay footage deserves? And then there's the question that makes this whole thing feel bigger than one play, because didn't something already go down between Clark and DeWanna Bonner just 2 nights earlier? Is there an actual pattern forming here? A target that keeps landing on Clark's back while the league looks the other way? And maybe the question that stings the most is this one. If this exact play happened to a different superstar, would the referees have called it a flagrant foul without a second thought? By the time this video wraps up, you are going to understand exactly what happened on that play, broken down frame by frame, and why the no call has officials catching heat from fans, analysts, and the Fever organization alike. I'm walking you through the Bonner altercation from 2 nights before this game, and explaining what it reveals about the tension that's been quietly building between these two teams all season long. I'm also covering what Stephanie White meant when she described this as part of a larger pattern the Fever have been raising concerns about since the offseason began. And I'll get into Clark's injury status after she failed to finish the game, along with what that means for Indiana as they head into a brutal stretch of their schedule. But before we get into all of that, do you think Alyssa Thomas deserves a suspension for this hit, or was this just a hard basketball play that blew up online for no real reason? Let me know in the comments.
You guys today, Caitlin Clark gets kneed in the groin, punched in the throat. Alyssa Thomas puts all of her body weight on her to stand up after falling to the ground, punching her and kneeing her in the groin. No foul gets called, they play on. Caitlin Clark shoots a 3. A player on the Phoenix Mercury gets into her landing space. Caitlin Clark comes down on her foot, no flagrant called. Caitlin Clark comes up, holding her back. The referees are terrible, but the worst part of all of this, Caitlin Clark got kneed in the groin, throat punched, landing space no call, and Stephanie White sat there on the sidelines with her arms crossed, tweaking, sniffing, twitching away. This is a coach that said, I ride with Caitlin Clark. Stephanie White, you ride with Alyssa Thomas, you ride with DeWanna Bonner. You don't ride with the CC22. You wish you did. You want people to think that you do, but you don't. You ride for Alyssa Thomas. You ride for DeWanna Bonner. You don't ride for Caitlin Clark. You don't ride for your team. The only person you might ride for.
What you just watched is a sequence that should have produced 3 separate fouls, and instead it produced 0. A knee to the groin goes unpunished. A closed fist to the throat goes unpunished. Then Clark gets landed on directly in her own shooting space with no flagrant review whatsoever, and she walks away holding her lower back like something is genuinely wrong. That's not a string of bad luck. That's a string of bad officiating, and pretending otherwise does a disservice to every fan who's been watching this play out night after night. What makes this particular clip hit even harder is the cutaway to Stephanie White standing on the sideline, arms crossed, visibly tense, but not drawing a technical, not getting in an official's face, not forcing the issue the way a lot of fans clearly expected her to in that exact moment. You're watching a head coach absorb something her own locker room is going to feel for days, maybe longer, and she's doing it almost silently. That contrast, the quiet on the sideline against the noise that's about to explode online once this clip starts circulating, is exactly where the real questions begin to take shape. So you're probably asking yourself right away how 3 separate, clearly physical plays like that get missed by an entire officiating crew in the span of under a minute. Is this just a genuinely bad night for the referees assigned to this game? Or is there something deeper and more systemic going on with how Clark gets covered and protected on the floor compared to everyone else? You're also wondering why Stephanie White didn't escalate harder in that moment, because body language by itself doesn't usually move a referee's whistle the way actually confronting them does. Did she say something off camera that the broadcast simply didn't pick up, or was that really just visible frustration with nowhere productive to go? And then the bigger, heavier question starts creeping in underneath all of that. If the league's most marketable and most watched player keeps absorbing this level of physical contact without real protection, what does that actually say about how seriously the WNBA is treating her safety relative to how much they're profiting off her visibility? That's the question that turns this from one rough sequence into something that feels like it actually matters.
The fact that you didn't get a technical today lets us all know you don't have the cojones, the gonads, the heart, the will, the want to stick up for your players, and you don't have the care to stick up for Caitlin Clark. You don't care about that player. You look at Caitlin Clark, that's your meal ticket. That's the person that's going to get you on a national stage so you can get credit for things that you don't deserve credit for. That's the person that you're going to hitch your wagon to so you can get all these broadcast jobs. So the Indiana Fever and their 2,000 fans can glaze you and kiss your behind. While the real Caitlin Clark fans are like, you're trash. Brush your hair. Stephanie White needs to go. Kelly Krauskopf needs to go. Amber Cox needs to go.
Here's the direct answer. No hedging. The officiating in this stretch was a clear and obvious failure, and there's no honest version of this where 3 uncalled fouls in under 60 seconds is defensible basketball officiating. That part isn't really up for debate once you watch the replay slowed down. The coaching response is murkier territory. Body language reads as frustration, sure, but frustration without a technical, without a sideline confrontation, without a pointed post-game statement doesn't actually protect a player in real time. It just signals discomfort after the fact. Whether that's restraint, strategy, or a genuinely missed moment is fair to question and fair to debate, but it's a separate conversation from the officiating itself, and folding the two together lets the referees off easier than they actually deserve. The bigger pattern underneath all of this is real, though, and it's not going away anytime soon. Clark draws contact at a rate that very few players in this league experience on a nightly basis, and the widening gap between that physicality and how consistently it actually gets called has been one of the loudest talking points of this entire season. That gap is exactly what fuels what happens next, because the reaction to this one clip got a lot louder and a lot more personal than just a coach standing quietly with her arms crossed on the sideline.
The Indiana Fever lose today. 111-109 to the Phoenix Mercury. Caitlin Clark left the game late in the third quarter. The Indiana Fever lost, and to be as transparent as I possibly can, I don't care. To be as transparent as I possibly can, to be as upfront and honest as I possibly can, I don't care. Caitlin Clark's not playing. Nah, whatever. Okay, they lost. So what? Kelsey Mitchell should have carried them to the victory, right, Stephanie? Right? Kelsey Mitchell should have carried you to the victory. The Hub should have carried this game. No, you lost Caitlin Clark. You lost the game. Yeah, good.
The final score reads, Fever 109, Mercury 111, and for a brief moment, that almost gets framed as the headline, until the entire conversation pivots hard and fast to where it actually belongs. The loss barely registers here, and honestly, it shouldn't, because a final score means very little compared to a franchise player walking off the floor holding her lower back in the middle of the third quarter. What's right about this clip is the refusal to let the scoreboard distract from the story that actually matters tonight. What's far more questionable, and frankly more damning, is the claim being raised about how this injury was handled in the lead-up to this moment, with the suggestion that it was minimized, brushed off, or outright dismissed before the visual evidence on camera made that position impossible to maintain with a straight face. If a back injury serious enough to end someone's night was treated as a non-issue right up until the cameras caught her walking gingerly toward the tunnel, that's not a minor communication slip or an innocent miscommunication. That's a credibility problem, and it's exactly the kind of thing that doesn't just quietly disappear once the post-game press conference wraps up and the cameras turn off. So naturally, you're sitting there wondering how a back injury serious enough to actually pull Clark from the game in the third quarter could have possibly been waved off as nothing beforehand, especially when the footage tells a completely different story. Was this genuinely downplayed internally by the coaching staff, or is that characterization being read into vague body language and a few non-committal comments after the fact maybe more than is fair? You're also asking yourself why the loss itself is being treated as almost irrelevant in this clip, when under normal circumstances, a result like this would dominate the entire post-game conversation on its own merit. Is Kelsey Mitchell quietly being set up as the fallback narrative here? The player expected to single-handedly carry a team through games where Clark physically can't finish? And underneath all of that sits the question that actually matters most heading forward. If the organization is shaping the public messaging around an injury before fans have full visibility into what's really going on, what does that mean for how much you can genuinely trust what's being said about her health from this point on?
What we all care about is Caitlin Clark leaving the game with a back injury. The same back injury that Stephanie told us wasn't an injury. The same back injury that they tried to hide until they got called out about it. You can see her walking gingerly to the back right there.
Here's the direct take, and there's no need to hedge on this one. The scoreline genuinely doesn't matter much in this particular conversation, and treating it as a footnote is the right instinct, because no single regular season loss carries anywhere near the weight of a star player's long-term physical health. The messaging question, though, is the one that actually deserves real scrutiny here. Teams downplay injuries constantly across every sport. That part isn't unique to the Fever organization at all, but downplaying something that ends up being visible enough for fans to spot it themselves on camera erodes trust fast. So at this point, you're probably asking yourself how a play this physical, shown twice now in slow motion, still didn't draw a single whistle from anyone on the officiating crew. Is this really about Thomas specifically, a player with a long-standing reputation for physical, sometimes reckless contact, or is this symptomatic of something the league has been letting slide across multiple matchups all season? You're also wondering whether the criticism about her lacking skill is a fair basketball take or just frustration boiling over into something more personal, and whether that distinction even matters once the contact itself is this clear. Here's the direct answer. Replayed in slow motion, this contact does not read as incidental, and any honest assessment of this footage lands on the same conclusion. This should have been called in real time. The skill criticism is where things get murkier because physical, attrition-based defense has always had a place in this league, and reducing a veteran defender's entire game to no talent oversimplifies a more complicated basketball reality, even if the frustration behind it is understandable. So where does this actually leave us? A sequence of missed calls, a coach who stayed quiet when the moment screamed for noise, and a star player walking off holding her back while the league's messaging tried to outrun the footage. That's the real story tonight, not the final score. And here's the blunt truth. When the most watched player in the league keeps absorbing this level of contact without consequence, that's not just an officiating problem. It's a credibility problem for the entire WNBA. Whether you think Thomas deserves a suspension or think this is overblown, one thing's certain, this conversation isn't ending anytime soon. If you want the next angle covered the moment it breaks, this is exactly the kind of story we track closest, so subscribe and stay locked in for what happens next.